Yeah, thanks, Nora. And as ever, we are going to start in the southern Gaza Strip. We'll give you a map to get your placements and your footing here for this next 40 minutes or so. We're going to cover all of the Gaza Strip. There's operations happening from the south to the north. And as Nora pointed out in her newscast, there's massacres happening all over Gaza that don't have anything to do with the battlefield. Airstrikes and artillery hitting civilians is something that we have been dealing with through this entire war, and there's no let up of that, as Nora's report always brutally puts in. Puts in context. So I will be focusing on the battle spaces. If we look at the next map here, we can see Rafah. There hasn't been fighting in Rafah for the past several weeks, but this week there was quite a bit of fighting actually in Rafah. Israel believed that Rafah has been cleared of humans. As we know, 𝐓𝐿 Sinwar was killed in a confrontation in Tel Sultan there that you can see at the north of the map. The Rafah crossing down at the bottom of the map is the outside, the access to the outside world that Palestinians desperately need in Gaza and have not had since the 6th of May when Israel moved into Rafah. But from Israel's point of view, they have cleared Rafah, or believed they had cleared Rafah. Like all other places in Gaza, they will likely return to Rafah because they haven't cleared it. And I think the reporting on this show has illustrated that. But on the past few days, 𝐓𝐿 fighters were able to carry out a complex operation against enemy soldiers and vehicles near the Burj Awad junction in Rafah a short while ago. Our fighters spotted a number of occupation soldiers in the area and successfully sniped 3 of them with Al-Ghul rifles and confirmed 2 dead. As soon as a Zionist Merkava tank arrived to rescue them, it was targeted with a Yasin 105 shell. So we're having multi-stage attacks happening in Rafah over this week. The targeting of the tank left the crew fleeing the tank, according to this field report, and helicopters, medevac helicopters, were spotted by 𝐓𝐿, which is something we have seen, of course, on film many times. So far, this video is not on film. We may have one by the next show, but so far not yet. But then there was another operation the next day, a multi-stage ambush of an engineering infantry force that is still moving through the border area along the Philadelphia corridor. 5 soldiers were hit with an anti-personnel IED. And then just again today, an armored personnel carrier struck in Rafah. So we have operations happening continually over this past week in Rafah, and not just 𝐓𝐿 operations. The DFLP and the Popular Resistance Committees were both involved in artillery attacks in the Rafah area. So the battle in Rafah does not appear to be over. Despite Israel's declarations and moving their fighters, their soldiers from the 162nd Division up to Jabalia, where they have been carrying out the now 2-month siege of Jabalia. So if we look at map C here, we get the zoom in on the Netzarim Corridor. And as I stated over these last few weeks, the Netzarim Corridor has been widened. It's now 7-kilometer wide piece of Israeli territory that includes bases, outposts, not bases yet, but Israel's intention is to hold on to this corridor, according to reports in Army radio, for at least another year. And operations happen in the Netzarim Corridor multiple times a day by the Joint Operations Room, which is the unified command under 𝐓𝐿 of all of the other groups, the Popular Resistance Committees, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, other smaller groups like the Mujahideen brigades and the Ansar brigades fight together in this corridor, Saraya al-Quds Islamic Jihad, carrying out joint operations both with 𝐓𝐿 and with each other in the Netzarim corridor, firing artillery onto the Israeli positions in the corridor, while the Israeli military is attempting to expand the corridor into Tel El-Hawa and Zaytun, which we have been covering for many months. That is still an ongoing process. But of course, the main focus has been on the north, Jabalia, and the Jabalia refugee camp, which is north of the city of Jabalia, and Beit Lahia, which is on the opposite side of Beit Hanun there in the northwest of Gaza. These have been the centers of this siege policy that Israel has invoked and attempting to cut off the Jabalia camp from the north of the West Bank of Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. Of course, we'll remember back that the war began in Beit Lahia, the first operations of the Israeli ground war. Now 390 days of ground war there has been. We're in Beit Lahia, and they're still fighting fiercely in Beit Lahia, and we'll see that later on in the show as well. Army Radio released an interesting assessment from the Israeli military talking about the operation in Jabalia, which they say has cost them 28 soldiers, including multiple battalion commanders and the most senior officer killed in the war. The commander of the 401st Armored Brigade was killed in Jabalia. But they're talking about a semi-permanent presence in Jabalia, not simply a raid in the way that we have seen before. There has been multiple raids, as I've talked about. There was a major operation in November, December, to quote unquote clear Jabalia of Qassam fighters, which failed, even though the Israelis claimed operational control. They came back in May and fought a 5-week battle in May where they destroyed 70% of the refugee camp, of the Jabalia refugee camp, and again left declaring victory, only to reinvade in early October and carry out this siege policy that they are currently brutally involved in. More than 2,000 people killed, more than 6,000 people wounded. Of course, these are undercounts because the civil defense is not able to operate. The ambulances, the fire trucks, the hospitals are under siege, as Nora reported. Even the doctors themselves are being targeted, which the doctors that remain are being targeted. We know that many of the doctors were frog marched out of the hospital and taken to Israeli torture camps in southern Israel. So the idea that that Army Radio put out over its airwaves just the other day was that the purpose of the clearing operation in Jabalia and the north was to set up a plan that would last for 3 more months. So this is the first that we've heard of a timeline for this brutal operation. And this is just really this invasion of Jabalia is taking the genocide to the next level. It's returning to these places again and again to continue to carry out the genocide. It's not a linear process. They're returning back to carry out what wasn't finished in the first 2 operations. And that's why we're seeing such brutality. Their goal is scorched earth, to clear the area totally of people. And that we know is not happening. People are not fleeing the north en masse. They're not crossing the Netzarim Corridor and going south in numbers at all. We're talking in total, we're talking a couple of dozen, according to UN figures. What is happening is people are internally displaced within the north as well, moving from one place to another as their shelters are burned. But this 3-month plan is the first time that we have heard any kind of a timeline for how long Israel intends to carry on this operation for 3 more months. It's hard to even imagine that, given how brutal the situation is right now. But amid that, the resistance has been significant. And the first video that we're going to show here is actually from south of the Netzarim Corridor. This is Bureij, Al-Bureij camp, and these are fighters digging out an offensive tunnel that they've been based in. And again, it's fighters from the Bureij battalion who previously were saluting their commanders, Ayman Nofal, who was killed earlier in the war. And these fighters are talking about their friend Khalid, and Khalid was previously injured in the war. They come up from this tunnel and spot a D9 armored bulldozer and are hitting it with a Yasin 105. We know that this is the British. You can also see this is coming out of a tunnel, emerging from a second tunnel with an RPG-7 anti-tank warhead to fire at a D9 armored bulldozer. And though you can see there in that picture, the slat armor, it's not full armor. It's not sandwich armor like on the tank. So an RPG-7 from that distance firing at the cockpit of a D9 is an effective weapon. So still using appropriate weapons. Here's the fighter emerging from the third tunnel and getting his grasps. And picks up here a Merkava tank in his sights. So this fighter, Khalid, they said in that original part of the video, was previously wounded. You can see him disappear down into the tunnel there. So 3 successful tunnel operations in Bureij where there hasn't been fighting in months, and the fighters identifying themselves as the Bureij Battalion. They're not fighters that came from Nusrat. They're not fighters that came up from Rafah or Khan Yunis to fight. And here we're seeing the tank that was hit being towed. They had to call calling the tow truck move. And again, 𝐤𝐿 not targeting this process. They've been consistent throughout the war because you can see the 2 guys coming outside. So here's what I was saying. This is the fighters talking about Khalid, who was hurt earlier in the battle, and they're saying that the blood ignited Khalid, and that here are the men that we watch closely. Khalid has returned, announcing when the sword is angered, they will fight. And so he is previously wounded coming out of these tunnel operations. Israel hasn't gone in tunnels in many months. We haven't seen any kind of field reporting at all of tunnels in months. And the fighters are able to still use them in Bureij. Again, this is south of the Netzarim Corridor. And the Israelis are carrying out these operations to widen the buffer zone. There's also operations happening in Nusrat camp, which mostly involve bombing from the air. They haven't carried out a sustained ground operation in either Nusrat nor Bureij. They're on the outskirts of both of those. So interesting to see that this many months into the war, that you still have these units fighting in their place, something we've been watching for all along the war. Do Khan Yunis fighters come up and augment the fighters in the central camps? Or is this the Central Camps Battalion? Later in the show, we're going to see that that's the same case in Beit Lahia. It's not the Jabalia fighters fighting in Beit Lahia. It's the Beit Lahia Battalion fighting. So these fighters have not been dismantled in any meaningful way. And even if they were to be, they would move around. But we haven't seen that moving around yet at all. So this is the tow truck operation in Al-Bureij. This was from a few days ago. And this next operation is a complex operation that took place in Jabalia. You see the commander here setting up, again, his troop leading procedures. You can see the thermobaric warhead on the right there. He's identifying here these buildings. There's 2 buildings where Israeli special forces are in. I have edited out the movement of these soldiers, but you can see I edited in the bottom corner that they're in that building. And then here's the fighter, the guy on the right holding the beige thermobaric warhead. That is a 𝐤𝐿 built warhead. The normal RPG thermobaric warhead is a single charge, but 𝐤𝐿 has made a tandem, a Yassin tandem charge thermobaric warhead that will punch through the wall with the first charge, and the second charge is the fuel air explosion. Here's the sniper with his SVD, his Dragunov, and again, I've blurred out these soldiers, but they're in that building and they get sniped. That is a sniper on sniper attack. Palestinian snipers killing Israeli snipers, and we'll see later on in the video what that room would have looked like. We won't show you the room because of community guidelines. But here's these fighters with the thermobaric warhead, the tandem charge, getting into position, firing from an elevated position at this Israeli troop position that their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance has exposed, and hitting it directly. We're going to watch 3 Yassin strikes, 2 thermobaric and 1 Yassin 105 strike on 3 Israeli positions that are in 2 buildings. So these last 2 will be in the same building, but they're separate troop positions. And this is what we've seen also all war. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance movements of the resistance, particularly the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, has their eyes on all of these Israeli positions, these fortifications. So this is the third one in the same building, the upper floor of the same building. And at the end of this video, they're going to do what the Israelis don't do, which is an after a battle damage assessment. So here you can see I've edited this. That's the punch in the hole in the wall that was made by the thermobaric warhead. And then that last scene was the call signs from the soldiers who were shot. They left behind. We can't show it, but maybe tomorrow I can throw my Twitter up on the ticker and you can watch the full video, a full video there. But the after action, the battle damage assessment that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 does, they go to the room that this operation that we're watching right now takes place in. They go to the room and they find a bloody mattress. They find what I showed you there, the hole in the wall, which is punched by the precursor charge, the charge that's leaning on the ground right there on the guys holding it right there. You see the secondary charge, the small charge at the top. You can see it when he's holding that beige. The beige 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is the thermobaric warhead. So that first charge punches through the wall and allows the second charge, the fuel air explosion. Here's the sniper doing his calculations, and then he's going to fire. You can see the sniper setup of the IDF there. So that's a sniper on sniper hit. And of course, the Israeli snipers are just wreaking havoc in Gaza. There's endless stories of doctors treating young children with sniper wounds. You can see the thermobaric warhead in that fighter's arms there. And the tandem charged thermobaric warhead is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 built weapon. The Iranian and other makers of RPG-7 warheads that are thermobaric are single barrel. They're not tandem charged. So this is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 built weapon. And it's very effective, and you can watch to keep your eyes on it, because at the end, I'm going to show you the hole in the wall that it punched. And in that room, what I have edited out is that the soldier's uniform had to be cut off him. The mattress is soaked in blood. It's clear that this was a successful operation. They actually left behind the field shirt of the soldier, which identified his sniper unit. And the fighters pointed that out in the after action report or battle damage assessment, which is not what the Israelis do. The Israelis usually just bomb a building and leave it. So there's the hole that's punched by the thermobaric warhead. And here, this is the call signs. They captured the call signs for all of the Israeli units in the area, and that's what they have done. And I have pixel mask blurred out the blood that's on them. So a clearly successful operation by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and finding pretty useful. I mean, you can change your call signs pretty easily, but to find all the call signs and all the units in the area is a pretty significant operation that I wanted to bring you, and was worth doing those edits to meet the community guidelines of Twitter, which we do steadfastly. For the record. So number 3 is another thermobaric operation. These are 4 fighters, again, units of 4. When you read that there's 50 killed in Jabalia, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. These guys fight in small units, and we've seen those units, 4 to 6 men. Often, sometimes they're fighting in 2-man units. But this fighter is saying, the commander is saying that we're going to ambush an IDF special units force holed up in a building in the west of the city. He addresses Netanyahu and says the IDF hides in their tanks, armored vehicles, and fortifications, where they seek shelter in their tanks, fortifications, and armored vehicles. We seek shelter in the verses and words of God and the Holy Quran. So he's juxtaposing the belief systems of the two combatants in this case. And again, you're seeing tandem charge. That's a perfect view of the tandem charge 𝐓𝐡𝐞 thermobaric, where they have the second charge, the precursor charge for punching holes in the wall. Unclear if that was a message to Mohammed al-Deif, who was famously looked at his watch in that one video the Israelis released of him, the only picture they have of him since he was in university, that was found in Gaza during one of their searches. He Mohammed al-Deif looked completely different than what Israel said he was. And so the fighters have been often looking at their watches because that's what Dave was doing in those pictures. So again, successful thermobaric warhead charges, deployment of these weapons have been very well used. And these buildings, they're not being cleared, right? The IDF chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, called it a Sisyphean task to try to clear these areas, which is the analogy where the ball trying to roll the stone up the hill and it rolls back down on top of you. And that's basically what happens in these villages, in particularly in Jabalia, which has been the center of resistance in Palestine for decades, since the beginning of the armed struggle. There's no surrender happening in Jabalia. And until the Israelis, what the Israelis tell the Palestinians all the time, to lay down their arms. The only way is if the Israelis lay down their arms and release the Palestinian political prisoners. The Palestinians are not going to stop fighting, particularly not in Jabalia. So we look at this next operation in Jabalia, number 4. This is a shawad. You can see the fighters wiring it up. Again, multiple fighters involved in the process. They've gotten, at this point in the game, very good at it. Here, this is their surveillance camera spotting the unmanned remotely operated M113. So that's a truck bomb, a tank bomb that Israel packs with explosives and then sets about to clear the area by exploding it. So they've made a remote control car bomb that they use those M113 Zelda tanks to do. And so we're going to watch this Shawad detonate twice. Here's again, we're seeing the backup cameras, the reverse camera being used for a second angle, constantly repurposing these cameras for CCTV footage, and very effective. It's a devastating strike to hit these tanks, which I'm going to show you in the next video after we do this. We'll see just one more time because I want you to see how they're deploying the M113. They just only give us a short clip of it here, but here it comes. You can see it in the dark, so they've got surveillance on it. It just turns the corner, drives like any other vehicle, but it's packed with explosives and is going to be used to detonate against a building that they believe people are in. They're killing civilians with these weapons. They're using tanks that the Americans gave them, that they have thousands of, that can't withstand battle, but they're using them as essentially suicide bombers, unmanned car bombs, vehicle-borne IEDs is what the military lingo is for them. But it's really astonishing that they're using these. I think maybe there's just been so much happening in these last 14 months that people haven't zoned in on it. But let's look at number 5 tomorrow, because this is something that people often ask, like, what happens to the tanks? Well, this is from an IDF tank crewman. He brought these pictures to the world of this Merkava Mark IV Barak. It's brand new. This is the newest version of their, famous, heavily fortified tank. And if you look just down the barrel, maybe switch to the next one. Actually, tomorrow we can see it even closer. If you look down the barrel there, you can see the sandwich armor to the left of the barrel. That is the thickness of the tank, and inside those are reactive armor that go off to detonate to try to take the energy out of the incoming round. But you can see the way they use the plates that we talked about on the show last week that are used for fixing these vehicles. But the way the sandwich armor in this case is used and shown, because this tank was completely destroyed. The commander, the gunner, and the loader were all killed, and the driver, who's up in front of the engine block, survived, according to the IDF. But there's a few more pictures we can see here of the total destruction. If we go to the next one, completely destroyed this vehicle, and it's not clear what operation did it. There's a few videos that I've shown over the last couple of weeks that could have done something like this. Especially, we saw that one barrel bomb which is probably what we're looking at, did this. So a barrel bomb is using unexploded Israeli missiles and then taking the explosive material out of the missile and putting it into a 𝐄𝐤𝐿 canister, which you can make as big as you want. Once you've dug the hole, you can fill it up with multiple missiles if you want, multiple explosives from missiles, multiple missiles. Anyways, look at that. It just is completely destroyed this, famous tank that, their chariot of God vehicle that they believe is impenetrable. And this is being shown because it's a Mark IV Barak. They haven't shown us many of the other versions because those older tanks were they're not as new. They're showing this because it's the newest version of the tank, just mangled in this way. So you can see a lot of people, they ask in the comments, like, we don't see the after action. We don't see the battle damage because the fighters are skilled fighters and they leave the area before they see this. But this is something that would have had to be dragged through the streets in this shape, and they get it out into the buffer zone and show you something that's just a twisted pile of 70 tons of metal. So that's what happens when you get hit by IEDs, and the Israelis admitted that and showed this footage. At least their tank crew shared this footage. But just wanted to bring that to you. So that is this is from Jabalia. This was an operation in Jabalia that did this. The date is, it's circa the 25th of October is around the time that this happened. In pieces, and you can see the soldier who's taking the photo there. You can see his outline. So it's an Israeli soldier taking a photo of an Israeli tank that gave this information to the public. Well, they didn't mean to give it to the public. They give it to each other. And us, we grabbed a hold of it and are showing it to the public. Okay, I think that's the last one for the blown up tank. Number 6, this is an operation in Beit Lahia, like I said, and this is the focus, is because they're saluting their commander, Wael Rajab Abu Suhaib. He was the battalion commander of the Beit Lahia battalion, and he was killed in the first month of the war. He was killed along with Ahmed Gandour when the Israelis bombed in the early days of the war, before the ground war even started. And these fighters are saying that his fingerprints are all over these operations. Like, we've seen the fighters do this all the time, saluting their previous commanders. But here they've got a window of opportunity on a Merkava tank, and they're going to hit it with a Yasin 105. Still seeing all the weapons. They're using appropriate weapons in all spots. Some people asked, because of last week when I showed a video that showed that they were manufacturing weapons, if that meant that they don't have weapons. We haven't seen that be the case. They would be manufacturing weapons in order to continue to do so, not necessarily because they have to. And we haven't seen any indication that they have to. And here's the soldiers again in this building, being exposed in these buildings. We blurred them also out for YouTube guidelines. You can see the full video at my Twitter feed, but multiple things have been edited out of this video because after this operation, the fighters of Wael Rajab, they went out and caught these soldiers here that were coming across that we see here. They get in a shootout with these guys that we can't show on video, but it was an unsuccessful operation for the Israelis, and that's where the video ends for us. But there's about a 30-second shootout that you can watch where the deputy battalion commander was seriously wounded of the 90th Battalion. So a pretty senior officer, deputy commander, and another soldier was killed in that operation. And so you see the fighters here holding their commander, their Beit Lahia leader, who's also a senior figure in the Northern Division. He was killed early in the war, and he was one of only a small number of leaders that Qassam acknowledged their deaths right at the time of them, and they've been saluting him throughout the battle. But this is the most direct one that we saw. And of course, he's saying that the fingerprints of the leadership are on all these operations. These are not guerrilla operations. These are, I mean, they're textbook guerrilla operations, but the organization is functioning in the way it was created before the war. That's what they mean by their fingerprints are on these operations. The loss of their leadership doesn't mean that they can't carry out these actions. And that's the same case with Hezbollah. The loss of those leadership, they exist in a collective leadership, and they have trained cadres. So the loss of the leader is devastating, but it's not something that ends the armed struggle and in any way. And so this operation is another successful one. Yassin versus a tank, thermobaric versus a troop position, and then hand-to-hand, close quarters gunfight with an SVD, with a Dragunov sniper rifle that they have up in Beit Lahia. So Beit Lahia has been essentially wiped out almost entirely, but the resistance is still there fighting. And when the Israelis move or redeploy people will move back, as they always do, and clean up and carry on. They're not being, it's a war of annihilation, but the Palestinians refuse to leave. So those are the operations from the Gaza Strip over these past few days. I want to take a little bit of a look at the West Bank, because the West Bank never gets enough attention, and I always want to do more, but we're going to bring in a couple operations here. We remember back a few months ago at the end of the summer and early September, there was a multi-week operation in the West Bank where Israel went around and essentially dug up all of the roads and infrastructure in the camp as a punitive measure against the resistance. They did that when it was clear the Americans weren't going to do anything. They had Biden as a lame duck. He wasn't going to stop it. And so they went ahead and just destroyed the main fighting centers in the West Bank, which are Jenin, the camps around Nablus, Tulkarm, and Tubas, the northern West Bank, what the British used to call the Triangle of Terror, when the anti-colonial resistance, Palestinian resistance at that time, was against the British. And so let's take a look at some of these photos tomorrow. We have a video from Free Palestine TV, reporter Obada Tahena. He shows this on Free Palestine TV from Jenin, and showing that the occupation, we saw this. I showed you guys this months ago, but this is what it still looks like. And now winter's coming in, so it just turns this all to mud. And all these roads are all completely dug up. That was the goal, just to dig up the roads. But we'll see later in this segment that it doesn't work. It's simply a punitive measure because it actually helps the fighters bury explosives. What it does do is make it impossible for ambulances to come and go and take people to the hospital, which is what tractors are being used for. Four-wheel drives are being used for. The hospitals use them to get patients to the hospital. They've been working on this now. You see the family working on the outside of their house. They work on it themselves to try to get it into shape. We have another one from Nur Shams, because the same operation happened in Nur Shams, and the New York Times covered that today. Or yesterday, over this weekend, and you can see Nur Shams looks just a pie. It looks like a sandbox. They just dig up all the road and leave Palestinians to clean it up. And in the meantime, it's used as well. Let's look at these next operations, because you can see what it's used as. If we look at video 7.3, you can see the way that the road being dug up. As I said at the time, and as anyone, I don't think it's secret information. If you dig up the road and make it dirt, it's easier to plant IEDs. So here's an IED in Nur Shams outside of Tulkarm. There's two outside Nur Shams, or in Nur Shams camp. These two operations are. Then we're going to watch after this. You can't see it because it's a night battle, which is when. Oh, there was a third one. There's a third. This is all three of these are against bulldozers, because they're in with bulldozers tearing up the street. That's their primary purpose. And then we get a couple of close quarters battles that happen in the West Bank at night, when the fighters have the ability to move around a little bit more safely, and with the drone footage a little bit more difficult. So in the West Bank, the fighting happens at night. In the day, it's kids in the street throwing stones, it's protests. At night, the guns come out. And that has been the case for many, many years. We show after this one, you're going to see we took the audio track out of it. I don't think YouTube likes the gunfire tracks, but we're hearing the gunfight happen in this video, which again, you can see on my Twitter feed. And then we're going to see these vehicles, these Panther armored vehicles that the Israelis use in the West Bank, and they need to call a tow truck because they disabled one of their vehicles on one of these IEDs. So there's footage of the Israeli military hooking up one of these Panther armored personnel carriers so that they can tow them. Call a tow truck. So that if we look at number 8, you can really see why this is in Jenin. We saw them dig up the road. You can see the road dug up, and then naturally you plant an IED there, and the Israeli Jeep parks right beside it. And that Jeep is an MDT David. These Jeeps rolled off American cargo planes. The first cargo planes that landed in Israel after October 7th brought these Jeeps to fight. They don't fight in Gaza in them. These are for fighting in the West Bank. So the arms shipments, which at the time were the first arms shipments from the U.S. to Israel in the war, which we now know carries on multiple times a day. But that IED lifted that Jeep right off the ground in Jenin. So this was the first operation bringing it. And just to say, to repeat, that the digging up of the ground does the opposite of what it's intended to do. If the intention is to find IEDs, it doesn't do that. It gives you an opportunity to plant IEDs in a much easier way. And then this poster from Jenin really summarizes the link between the West Bank and Gaza, where 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 Jenin Brigade puts out this poster, and you can see there's the Panther vehicle in the back again that I just talked about. But it says Jenin will continue to fight as if it were Jabalia or Rafah. And again, the West Bank and Jenin, they call themselves Small Gaza. In Nur Shams, they called themselves Little Gaza, because the localized raids are doing very similar things, destroying houses, destroying infrastructure, closing schools. So they feel solidarity and a tight level of connection between the West Bank and Gaza. And of course, many operations going on in Tulkarm. They're naming their new IED in Tulkarm. They're naming it after Abu Shuja, who was the leader who was killed back in the summer in the raid. So you're seeing the naming, like we have the Yassin and the Al-Ghul rifle. Now in the West Bank, the IED is called the Shuja 1. And the next generation of fighters will grow up detonating weapons against the Israelis named after their previous commanders. So that is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank summary of the resistance report.